Ratings of perceived exertion, right? RPE. It usually comes in two forms. It goes on a 1 to 10 scale or a 6 to 20 scale. It was first put into research and into application by a Swedish researcher, Gunnar Borg, in the 1960s. Not that you really care about that, but it's a very useful tool to give us more subjective data and feedback about how you as an individual are performing and how hard something feels to you. And also if you're a coach, to be able to work with your clients and not just have to rely on percentages of 1 rep max and things like that sometimes can be challenging to, when you're starting to work with someone, if you don't have a 1 rep max to then base things off of. Or if you're just working in a sub-maximal range, using the 1 rep max method sometimes can be, just like extra work, right? It's just like, it's a little too far removed to be able to give us real-time feedback. And especially if we're doing things that are maybe a little bit more cardio-based or aren't necessarily as, focused on the true like 1 rep max, the heavy loads that we're looking at to potentially use in that. So what it's going to look like is we're using these forms of feedback and considering these things as we, as you rate yourself or as your client is giving the rating back to you. So you explain it in the way that, you're considering what's your breathing rate? What does your heart rate feel like? Are you seeing increased sweating? Are you seeing increased muscle fatigue? And you can also use something called the talk test. If someone is obviously breathing harder, that's an indicator that they're exerting more effort. The talk test kind of correlates pretty well with the RPE and the ratings of perceived exertion because we can see generally that if someone is still able to hold a conversation, they're probably in a lower end of that scale. If they're able to still talk, but they're having a hard time like completing sentences, fulfilling the whole conversation, maybe they're more in the middle in that 5 to 6 range. And if they can't talk to you, they can't hold on the conversation, they're probably working pretty intensely. So these are really good indicators, and for you as the coach, this is something that you can use as a tool to start to see and understand what your client is giving back to you. If someone tells me that their RPE is a 10, but they're still talking to me, then something doesn't match up. If they're vice versa, if they're rating themselves very low, right? They say that their RPE is a 4 or a 5, but then they can't talk, I know that they're probably underestimating how hard something is. Usually it's the other way around, but these kind of things help us understand what the subjective feedback is for someone. And so sometimes when people are starting out exercising, they don't really understand the full scope of how hard they're working, right? Or how much more they have to give. Sometimes people will say that it's an 8 or a 9, but then given the chance, they'll do 5, 10 more reps of something. And then that doesn't match up, right? If you're not seeing that the breathing rate's high, if you're not seeing that the heart rate's elevated, that they're sweating, that they're like maybe a little bit of shakiness or having some instability in the exercise, then that probably means to me as the coach that their actual exertion, they're maybe not quite as high as they think that they are. Okay, so the scale itself goes from 0 to 10. There's also a 6 to 20 scale. We're going to focus just on the 0 to 10 scale. I think it's just a little bit easier to use than the 6 to 20. That's the one that I prefer. You can use the 6 to 20. This is just what I prefer. So the way it works is if someone says it's a 1 to 2, obviously the effort is perceived to be very light. 3 to 4 is light to moderate. 5 to 6 is moderate to somewhat hard. 7 is high, vigorous intensity. 8 is very hard. 9 is V hard because now they can't breathe, right? They can't even say the word very. And then 10, they're deceased, they're dead. It's just very, very hard at this point, right? Max effort. RPE, this will give you a good indicator of, and as you get more comfortable with it, you'll start to learn what the true value of each exercise and the effort that you're putting forth is based on these things. So now one more way that we can correlate and then translate this a little bit further is using the RPE then in terms of reps in reserve. And sometimes these can feed back or give you an idea of one direction or the other of what the true RPE or reps in reserve looks like. So reps in reserve is just another tool that we can use that helps us to gauge how many more reps we feel like we could have done in a set. So instead of using percentage of 1 rep max, we can use the reps in reserve as a tool to say, okay, I feel like I could have done, if it was a 1 or 2 or a 3 or 4, I could have done all of the reps, right? I could have done 20, 25, 30 more reps, right? It's just like a feather. When we start to get into the more moderate ranges, into the more vigorous high intensity ranges, you're going to see that we start to see, okay, we maybe could have only done maybe 4 or 5, 6 more reps that might correlate into that 5 or 6 range. 3 more reps, and these aren't exact, but it's a good kind of gauge to use to start to see how they'll match up. A 7 for an RPE might mean we could do about 3 more reps, right? 8 for 2, 9 for 1, 10, I'm done. Like hit fatigue, I hit my complete wall. Now, how we can look at this is like how are you going to use this maybe to prescribe exercise can be beneficial too, because we look at, you know, potentially for someone that's just starting out, right? You don't want to crush them, right? You don't want to kill somebody's spirit or have them get rhabdo or not be able to walk, you know, move around or actually potentially hurt themselves in some big ways. We're not going to prescribe a 10 right off the bat. We're probably going to look more in that like 6 to 8 range for someone that's starting out. And remember that it's a perceived exertion. So even though the perception of it, right, like you might only prescribe, you know, 3 sets of 10 and, you know, you're only using 20 pounds for some rows or 20 pounds on each side, maybe for a squat, like something very low. That could feel like a lot of weight, a lot of effort for someone that's just starting out. So it's a good way to line up where someone that's just, you know, getting into it, starting to become more familiar. An advanced trainee, an advanced athlete, somebody that's been working for a long time, that 6 to 8 is going to look completely different. So that's where it's useful, because it's going to be more individualized like that. When we think of different styles of training, maybe like bodybuilding, right, there could be a little bit more focus on some of the hypertrophy, the longer like sets, like working to fatigue. We could be in that, you know, 7, 8 up to a 10, depending on the type of work that we're doing. For a power lifter, somebody that's really getting into like the upper ranges, like they're only probably doing maybe 1 to 5 reps, Olympic lifters, people that are really working at that near like maximal capacity, then we're going to need to work in that upper threshold sometimes to be able to elicit that adaptation. So it's important to keep that in mind. And there's going to be different pieces of it, like where, you know, the main lift, right, your main strength block of a squat, a deadlift, you know, a clean might be something that is going to be in this like 8 to 10 range. It might be a day that you want to pull back and just kind of grease the groove and get some quality reps in, more like just going through with good speed. The perceived exertion of that might be a little bit lower. You can also think like we have our main strength block, and then we potentially have our accessory block, our supplemental work. That supplemental work might be more volume, right? It might be just getting some more less towards that true like 1 rep, 3 rep type max. So this is a very useful tool to help you translate that and prescribe that in a little bit of a different way. So that is RPE, that's your ratings of perceived exertion. It's a very useful tool. Give it a try, start to see, you know, notice how you feel comfortable with it and use it as a tool. It's an amazing way to not just look at how we're gonna potentially increase our intensity by increasing the load or, you know, strictly just putting on more weight. We can look at increasing the intensity also in some ways related to this.